All right, so today we're going to take a fresh look at a classic Scottish story, S.R. Crockett's The Heather Lintie. And we're doing this because it's been stuck with a literary label for over 100 years, a label that I think you'll see completely misses the point. We're going to uncover the really sophisticated work that's been hiding there in plain sight all this time.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle what's called the Kailyard problem. Then we'll look at the simple story everyone thinks they know and contrast that with what's really going on beneath the surface. From there, we'll get into the satire, a really ironic ending, and finally, we'll put it all together to see Crockett's true sophistication.
Right. So first things first, we've got to get a handle on this central problem. It's all about a critical label. And I mean, this thing was basically weaponized against writers like S.R. Crockett. It's a label that has pretty much defined his reputation for generations.
So what is Kailyard? Well, it literally translates to cabbage patch. And you have to understand, this wasn't some literary club that authors signed up for. No way. It was an insult, a derogatory label cooked up by city-based critics to basically laugh at popular Scottish fiction that was set in the countryside. They just dismissed it all as sentimental, nostalgic, and, not serious.
And this is the question that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. What if this dismissal says more about the critics and their own prejudices than it does about the actual books they were reviewing? What if they were just missing the point completely, blinded by their own biases against rural life?
Okay, so how on earth did the Heather Lintie end up with this Kailyard tag? Well, to figure that out, we've got to look at how most people read the story. The standard, surface-level interpretation.
So, if you just read it on the surface, it seems like a pretty straightforward, kind of tragic tale, right? You've got this lonely woman, a naive poet from the countryside, and she gets saved from a nasty review because, conveniently, she dies right before she can read it. You can see why the critics jumped on this. They pointed to it and said, see, flawed, way too sentimental, a perfect example of Crockett just avoiding the harsh realities of life.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, when you actually dig into the text itself, something completely different starts to show up. A much grittier, way more complex reality, one that really doesn't fit with that sentimental label at all. Just take a look at the story's very first sentence. I mean, this isn't once upon a time, is it? It's so precise, it's technical, it's almost like you're reading a documentary about industrial labor. Right from the get-go, Crockett throws us into a world of hard work, not flowery sentiment. So he's definitely not painting some romantic, idyllic picture of the countryside. Nope. He's grounding us in the gritty, unglamorous reality of railway work. And this was a world he knew inside and out from his own family's experiences. This is industrial realism, plain and simple. And his description of the father's alcoholism? It's just as unflinching. This line is so dry, so ironic. Ginger beer is obviously a euphemism for whiskey. It's his way of showing us the harsh truth of addiction, but without any hand-wringing or sentimentality. It's just stark. And that right there, that is social critique. He's not just telling a sad story about one guy. He's drawing a direct line between the father's addiction and the brutal, soul-crushing conditions of his job. So that whole accusation that he avoided serious social issues, this just blows it right out of the water. The story also really hammers home Janet's deep, profound isolation. Think about it. The railway, this great symbol of modern progress and connection, doesn't connect her to anything. It just thunders past her little cottage, leaving her even more alone. It's a pretty sharp critique of the hidden, human cost of modernization. Okay, and this brings us to what I think is the real heart of the story. It's a biting satire of the publishing industry and the literary world. And this is a world that Crockett, being a journalist himself, knew intimately.
The whole conflict is captured in this one central metaphor. You have the Nighthawk, that's the predatory big city newspaper, and then you have the Heather Lintie, which is a real bird, a small songbird also called a linnet. That's Janet, the vulnerable artist from the country. The power dynamic couldn't be clearer. It's urban predator versus rural prey.
I mean, listen to this line from the critic's review. It is just dripping with cultural arrogance. He basically says he can't be bothered to understand her Scottish name, and then compares it to Erse or Choctaw. It's just this incredible display of the deep-seated prejudice that the metropolitan elite had for anything outside their own little world. When you look at this, it's pretty hard to ignore the autobiographical echoes. Just like Janet, Crockett paid out of his own pocket to publish his first book of poetry. And just like her, he got smacked down by the literary establishment. You really get the feeling he's using Janet's story to work through his own frustrations with the whole game of publishing.
All right, let's talk about the ending, because this is probably the most misunderstood part of the entire story. On the surface, it seems like the ultimate proof that this is a sentimental story. But if you look closer, it might just be Crockett's most clever and sophisticated move.
So you've got two ways to read this ending. The traditional interpretation is that it's a sentimental cop-out, right? A cheap way to avoid a harsh reality. But there's a more sophisticated rereading. And in this view, the ending is actually deeply ironic. It's not about avoiding reality at all. It's about forcing us, the readers, to confront it head-on.
So when you read that final line, God is more merciful than man, maybe it's not a straightforward religious statement. Maybe Crockett isn't talking about divine intervention. Maybe it's actually a bitter, powerful critique of human cruelty, specifically the casual, thoughtless cruelty of a critic who can just destroy someone's spirit with a few strokes of a pen.
So, okay, we've peeled back all these layers. What does this all mean for S.R. Crockett's reputation? Where does this leave us?
Well, what we've seen is that the Heather Lintie is so much more than a simple Kailyard story. It's actually a really complex, self-aware piece of writing. It's a critique of industrial life, of social isolation, and get this, it's a critique of the very cultural machine that tried to label it and dismiss it.
And you know, looking at it this way does more than just rescue one short story. It really makes you question the whole system of literary judgment. It shows how these labels, like Kailyard, can be used as cultural weapons, and it forces you to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. How much of what we consider great literature is based on actual merit, and how much is just shaped by the prejudices of the time?
And this, for me, is the story's hidden genius. It's almost like a trap for the reader. Because if we dismiss Janet, if we roll our eyes at her poetry and call it sentimental, well, then we're doing the exact same thing as the arrogant critic in the story. We end up failing the test that Crockett has quietly set for us. Which leaves us with one last, kind of provocative thought to chew on. This isn't just a history lesson about the 1890s. Who are the Heather Linties today? What brilliant, important, sophisticated work are we all missing out on right now simply because it doesn't fit neatly into our own cultural blind spots about what serious art is supposed to look like?